Mafia. He was at the crime scene before it happened. The word mafia means something different in Italy than it does here in America. In Italy, mafia is not used to describe a gang of criminals that controls the country. Our first story comes from Little Italy, New York City. Joseph Barbera had been acting strange lately. His behavior had changed dramatically over the last few months, almost like he was a different person. This came from another member of the Bonanno crime family. He tried to run off, but they shot him multiple times. He died right there on the doorstep. What's crazy about this case is that the woman who opened the door was one of the girlfriends of the hitman. The girl that Joseph was dating called 911, but it was too late. Joseph was dead. Now, police know who's responsible for the murder, but they can't find any evidence to charge Dominic and Matthew. This has been going on for decades now. And if the statute of limitations hasn't already run out, it's running out very soon. He realized that he had made a terrible mistake by helping Giovanni. So he called the police and told them everything. The police were able to catch Giovanni and charge him with murder. However, Vincenzo was also charged with being an accessory to murder. They were sitting in a private booth in the back of a popular Italian restaurant. Suddenly, two men entered the restaurant. As they were leaving, one of the men suddenly stood up. He approached Paul and, without saying a word, shot him multiple times. Paul collapsed to the ground, bleeding profusely. But when the hitmen arrived at the restaurant, they saw that Fatico wasn't there. Instead, they saw Paul, so they killed him. But who ordered the hit on Fatico? These stories show just how dangerous the mafia can be. But it also shows how sometimes they aren't able to carry out their plans. If you think the mafia is scary, wait till you hear about the most ruthless assassins in the world. It turned out that it was none other than Paul Castellano himself. He had ordered a hit on Fatico because he was planning to retire and wanted Fatico to take his place. But Fatico was a better leader than Paul ever was, and eventually took control of the entire crime family. He also ordered a hit on Paul, but he didn't know that Paul had already taken out a hit on him. In the end, it was Paul who ended up dead. His friends tried to help him, but it was too late. He was rushed to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Police quickly learned that the two gunmen were Michael Franceschi and Thomas Belletti. They were both members of the Gambino crime family. They had been hired to take Paul's life, but who sent the hitmen? They sat down at a nearby table and ordered some food. That's why it was so shocking when he was killed. Whoever gave the order to kill him was a powerful figure in the mafia, but police couldn't figure out who it was. They questioned many members of the Gambino crime family, but nobody seemed to know who would want Paul dead. The investigation was eventually dropped, and the case went cold. It looked like Paul's murder would never be solved. But the men weren't really interested in eating. Instead, they were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Meanwhile, Paul was enjoying his meal. He was completely unaware of the danger that lurked nearby. He thought that by helping the police, they would understand that he wasn't really involved, but they didn't care. Vincenzo was sentenced to 4 years in prison, but only served 2 before being paroled. He was a free man, but he had made powerful enemies in the mafia. They were furious that he had turned on Giovanni and wanted revenge. Vincenzo was forced to enter the witness protection program. To this day, he still lives in fear that one day the mafia will come for him. There may never be justice for Joseph's murder. Apparently, his father was getting a hit out on Joseph because he was bringing bad toxicity to the family. At this point, Joseph knew that he had to leave New York City. So he did just that. He packed up his belongings and moved to Los Angeles. But the Bonanno crime family found him there. He was so angry that he stormed out of the house. He'd been given a target. A man who was supposedly part of the Italian mafia. Giovanni was supposed to scare the man, not kill him, but he got nervous and shot him. Giovanni was worried that he would get in trouble, so he was trying to clean up the mess. Vincenzo was shocked to hear this, but he knew that he had to help his old friend. He helped Giovanni clean up the blood and dispose of the body. After that, they parted ways. He got into his car and drove down the street. That's when he spotted an old friend of his, Giovanni Piter. Giovanni and Vincenzo grew up together and were best friends since childhood. When Vincenzo saw Giovanni, he decided to park his car nearby and walk up to him. Vincenzo wanted to tell his old friend how great it was to see him again. But when Vincenzo approached Giovanni, he realized that his face was pale. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days. Not only that, but he had blood all over his clothes. Giovanni was shocked to see Vincenzo. He quickly turned around and tried to walk away, but Vincenzo stopped him. He asked his old friend what had happened and why he had blood all over his clothes. Giovanni hesitated, but eventually broke down and told Vincenzo everything. Just like they could smell blood in the water, they knew that they had a chance to take out Joseph. And so they hired 2 hitmen to do the job. Their names were Dominic Bruno and Matthew Madonna. They traveled out to LA to bring Joseph back to New York. They found him at his girlfriend's house. They knocked on the door, and she let them in. To make matters worse, his behavior put him at odds with the Bonanno crime family. They were one of the 5 families that controlled organized crime in the United States. It all started when Joseph was arrested for possession of a stolen car. He paid a hefty fine and went on his way. But things started to go downhill after that. Instead, Mafia is used to describe someone who is arrogant or presumptuous. Tony was also a member of the Bonanno crime family. Tony walked up to Joseph and asked him why he was driving around in a stolen car. Joseph tried to explain himself, but Tony wasn't having it. He slapped Joseph and told him that he was supposed to be running numbers for them. If he wasn't going to do that, then he needed to stay out of their way. From that day forward, Joseph became an outcast within his own family. He was even shunned by his own mother. She was sick of the drama and didn't want anything to do with either of her sons. The word eventually took on a new meaning, one that we are much more familiar with today. That's what we'll be discussing in this episode of He Was at the Crime Scene Before It Happened. Joseph was driving home one night when he noticed a man walking along the street. It was none other than Joseph's cousin, Anthony. A few weeks later, Joseph got wind that his own father was planning to kill him. When Joseph answered the door, he saw that the 2 men were holding guns. He immediately knew that he was in trouble. But what about our next story? Mafia, the accidental hit. In 2006, Vincenzo Ramello got into a heated argument with his wife. It turns out that Giovanni had accidentally killed someone. But the following morning, Vincenzo woke up and felt sick to his stomach. Now, for our final story. Mafia, who sent the hitman. On February 14, 1980, Valentine's Day, Paul Castellano was enjoying a nice meal with his friends. About 30 minutes later, Paul and his friends finished their meal. Paul was a boss in the Gambino crime family. In fact, he was one of the top bosses in the whole organization. However, in 2017, new evidence surfaced. It turned out that the real target wasn't Paul, but his underboss, Anthony Fatico, Mafia. He was at the crime scene before it happened. All 3 of these men ended up dead because of the Mafia. Now check out, they're so ruthless they kill without hesitation, or check out, these assassins were hired to kill JFK.